world, and the oil price is literally trading on the nose of $78 on Brent this morning. Let's kick off with Neil Atkinson, former head of oil markets division at the IEA in London today. Neil, what's driving this market principally? Have we broken out of the $75 anchor that Brent has been locked in for some time? And what is the momentum at this point?
Well, it does look as if, Sean, that there may well be here a change in sentiment based on two things. Number one, the large voluntary cuts that Saudi Arabia has pledged to make, and of course the cuts that Russia has pledged to make, but we don't know whether they're speaking the truth. And on the other side of the balance, there are still plenty of people out there that think that demand growth remains fairly strong. So a combination of those has put a bit of upward momentum behind the price, but I don't think we should get too excited. It's not as if prices are soaring, but it does look as if we could be settling into a new trading pattern, which is $5, $6, $7 a barrel higher than the one we were stuck in for several weeks until recently.
Let's go to Laurie Hatayan, MENA Director at the Natural Resource Governance Institute, sitting in Belgium presently. Laurie, big story overnight is Turkey finally relenting on Sweden's accession to NATO. Any other day of the week, that's a massive story. I mean, Finland and Sweden joining NATO, it's kind of, in another year, another decade, would be earth-shattering news. How does it come about today? What does Erdogan want from this deal?
Yes, as you said, like it should have been a big news, but it is a news among many news in this transitional world that we are living in, and the new system that is being set in front of our eyes, and we don't know exactly what it would look like. So basically, Turkey divided its role on who gets into the NATO to two, before the elections and after the elections. And so for Sweden, it was more of internal issues because of the opposition, etc. So they waited for after the elections, and then now they've put Mr. Erdogan is portraying himself as the one that is allowing these countries to come in. So he's playing his international role again after getting some concessions, it seems, from from Sweden for issues that interest him. So basically, he used what he could use for the elections. He won the elections, and now going back to portray himself as an important leader and the bridge between NATO and at the same time between NATO and Moscow. So playing the role that he likes to play, at the same time putting again this issue of EU-Turkey relations on the table. Maybe he has put it very high to say that we want like to go back to the discussions about being part of the EU, but then he is reopening the whole discussions about EU-Turkey relations, so that at the end that had impact and resonated with the US, where US was were very happy. So all of these are very important for Mr. Erdogan, for money to come into the economy of Turkey, because this is very important for him to rebalance the economy or to relaunch the economy. So so we take it from the angle of Turkey in all of these issues. Definitely the EU is happy. They said, like the minister of the German minister said at 32, we're stronger together, etc. But I think it's a Turkish story more than.
I mean, when you add, Laurie, when you add the cumulative postures, positions taken since the election, appointing investor-friendly leaders in the finance and central bank portfolios, conceding to Sweden's accession, etc., the expression of, again, out of the blue, of interest to join the EU, can we take away from that this is Erdogan turning west more than Russia east, or is it just another day in the week of Erdogan multiple faces?
Look, I think there is a trend in the region now that we want to be friends with everyone that can help us, or our interests come first. It's not about like aligning with this against that. For years, this policy has been, or this politics has led to sometimes to advantages, sometimes not. So I think we're seeing it from the Gulf to Turkey to these regional powers. We're seeing that, you know what, our interests come first. We work with the US on certain things. We work with Russia on things. We are the bridge when it comes. We want to talk to China. We want to do business with everyone, and our interests come first. So he is doing the same with this. Like it's
like
not
the Saudis and others.
Exactly. This is the trend. Like what you see, it's the trend that our country's interests come first. We're not going to align. It is a divided world with a new transition setting in that we don't know much about it, and we don't want to be in the middle, have to choose between this and that. We want to choose our interests. They all have economic challenges that they want to overcome. And for Mr. Erdogan, that's it. It's not turning to, but it's just like one additional card that he wants to play, because as we said, now that he has been re-elected, now that he doesn't have much time, maybe because he sees maybe that now maybe this is his last term, he wants to work on the economy, and he wants to do it in a rational way where money comes into the country and not in the populist way, I guess.
Let's go to China, to Victor Yang, senior analyst at the JLC Network Technology. Victor, of course, the big story of the different narratives that could be driving the oil markets. OPEC, Neil mentioned the OPEC supply cuts, but China demand, China stimulus is another big factor possibly driving the oil markets, at least potentially. Victor, we've just finished Q2. Can you give us a quick summary of how China economic recovery progressed through second quarter, and then we can look forward?
Yes, sure, Sean. And well, the country's economy has been kind of weaker than previously expected. And the recovery in the industry is not fast so far. It's still a bit slow because of the lingering effects from the pandemic. You know, a lot of companies, particularly private ones, have been financially strained by the pandemic. So they're still in the process of recovering. And as for oil demand from the industry, diesel demand has been relatively weak too in the second quarter. And particularly since May, well, it slipped a little bit because of the high temperature and a lack of fund in the investment in infrastructure construction. There's not enough fund yet on this front. But the country's oil demand, particularly crude oil demand, has actually been growing quite fast. Say in the first 5 months, it grew by about 6.2%. And considering
year-on-year?
it, yes, considering its economic growth is quite fast, and the country actually still put away some crude in the first 5 months. Part of the reason was because of the concerns about energy security among these geopolitical concerns. So, but we are looking at faster.
So you're saying, Victor, in the first half, there was a lot of oil imports, but not necessarily consumption. The oil imports were high, but the oil was not consumed domestically.
Well, based on official data, about 714,000 barrels per day were put away. And so
put away
you see
being put into storage.
Yes, storage. And so the country continued to store crude this year, particularly if crude stays relatively low. Yes, and we expect faster recovery in the second quarter, in the second half of the year. Yes.
The year started, Victor, with everybody predicting a year of two halves, and that China would really come, you know, its real power would be felt in the second half. We're now in the third quarter. We're seeing signs and mutterings of stimulus, the ability of the Chinese government to stimulate its economy further, as we saw in America and in Europe coming out of COVID. What's your expectation for the Chinese government to be able to have an impact with stimulus in the third and fourth quarter?
Well, we expect the stimulus to accelerate in the last
But
two
what would it look
quarters.
like? I'm seeing the pictures behind you of buildings under construction. Of course, that was very much in the past, China's stimulus, build more roads, build more railroads. What can stimulus look like now?
Well, a lot of investment now is in the new energy and some kind of new infrastructure. Say particularly now it's very hot in China too, and the government has pushed it forward with the actually must say sped up the commissioning of facilities for power generation, particularly from new energy. And for private companies, the stimulus would be growing in the last 2 quarters. And the country is also trying to boost exports to stimulate its economy. Say, particularly say, if it is necessary, it might boost oil product exports too, say in the last 2 quarters. So we expect, and on the whole, we expect stimulus to be faster than in the first half of the year.
Neil, one of the big factors that we've been talking about, and I bring it up because it came up last week at the OPEC International Seminar in Vienna. IEA was not there. There was some criticism from the stage of the IEA sort of misreporting the accuracy of numbers, and other media companies were not permitted to attend because there was some concerns that they were also misrepresenting the data. What are your thoughts on the fact that we have not seen IEA, or even OPEC for that matter, revise down its forecast for the year ahead, given on the one hand they're cutting supply, on the other hand they're trying to balance the market? Neil, your thoughts?
Well, there's quite a lot in what you've just been saying there,
Yeah.
Sean. So, not point one.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, the OPEC Secretariat releases its latest monthly market outlook, and the day after, the IEA publishes its latest monthly outlook. It is possible that particularly the IEA might revise down its estimates for demand growth, because the IEA so far this year has been showing demand growth as being very, very strong, well over 2 million barrels a day year-on-year demand growth.
And much of that packed into the third and fourth quarter.
Exactly. I mean, the third and fourth quarter has to do an awful lot of heavy lifting. And there's an awful lot of reliance within the IEA's numbers, for sure, on China. And, Victor's just been explaining to us very, very clearly about some of the issues that are in China. And I believed all along that the IEA's number, and indeed the OPEC Secretariat's demand outlook number, however well constructed it may be, and a good set of professional people doing the work, I've always thought it was overcooked. So it could well be cut back this week, but let's wait and see. Now, the other issue about the IEA not being present at the OPEC seminar, well, it is no great secret that the relationship between the IEA and OPEC is not very good, to say the least. And a lot of that stems from the publication of the IEA's net zero report in 2001, which the Saudi Arabian oil minister launched into virtually the day it was published, and described it as being from La La Land. So, if you're in that situation, then it's very difficult. The idea, however, and I really would like to tackle this head on, that the IEA, and indeed anybody else, other forecasters, other consulting firms, are, well, you use the word misrepresenting data, whether it be production data from the producers themselves or other data that is in the public domain, and have in some way some kind of agenda. And my pushback has always been over many, many years, and indeed particularly when I was at the IEA, and the challenge was to leading oil producers with whom we had discussions at a technical level about data. Well, publish the data, show us your numbers. Don't turn around and tell us, oh, you can't see that because it's a state secret, which is what we heard from the lips of one important Middle Eastern country, which I won't name. They are not helping themselves, because they're not like the US, which publishes lots of wonderful data on a weekly basis, monthly basis, and so on and so forth. So I don't think the OPEC countries have a great deal of credibility in telling us that, that we're misrepresenting what's going on in the market, because they are not contributing sufficiently, in my view, to the transparency of that market.
But they do. OPEC does rely heavily on secondary sources in order to benchmark all of its members' commitments to their. So they're not even advocating their own numbers. They're taking money, energy intelligence, the energy aspects. I'm not sure who's on the list these days, but ultimately it is a group. Not the IEA.
Yeah, we were kicked off the list. And you know, just quickly on that, because I don't want to speak for too long.
Please.
You know, that going back 30 odd years, when I worked for Petroleos de Venezuela in the London office, I used to participate in this secondary source exercise that took place every month. And basically, you get a bunch of analysts in as many companies, consulting firms, or any other source that the media can get their hands on, and take their estimates of where they think production is. And those estimates were formed by the analysts basically from using the same limited set of tanker tracking data to track exports. And then you add on to that your estimate of local refining activity to come up with some kind of production number. And it's not much better than that today. It is better because the tanker tracking, the satellite services are way more sophisticated than they were 30 years ago. But the fact, as you said, that they are relying on secondary sources to try and validate what each other is doing is, I think, one of the major flaws in the arguments that they put forward, that the market is misinterpreting what's going on. It isn't misinterpretation, and it's not speculators. You know, it's the fundamentals. That's what's driving the market.
And this is not an unimportant point. And the reason I mention it on the podcast this week is because the most important person in the international oil industry spent quite a bit of time last week in his feature interview articulating this point of acknowledging that OPEC needed to get their house in order in terms of aligning quotas with actual production and other things like that, but also taking issue with others who were misinterpreting data and so forth. But so the rights and the wrongs of it is really not the point, but ultimately there is a big potential issue here that clouds the market and maybe confuses the ability of the market to trade. Let's go to Laurie, because Laurie, another part of driving the market at the moment is this extra supply that has kind of come in from places that weren't really expected, like Iran, for example, and the sort of on the back of the rapprochement between Saudi and Iran, facilitated by China. It does look like part of that, whether it's a gateway to more exports coming out of Iran, or just happens to be in a parallel corridor, but there is more oil coming out of Iran, and the question is, will sanctions try and shut it down? And the general opinion seemed to be that the Americans were taking a softly approach. But then this morning we have a story out of Indonesia of the Indonesians detaining an Iranian vessel conducting activities that they deem to be a violating of sanctions. Your thoughts on where the Saudi-Iran rapprochement is at this point and what it means for Iran's ability to export more oil?
So on the rapprochement, as we said, like at that, it was needed because Saudi Arabia wants to calm down the region. They want to really focus on what they're doing, which is like a huge transformation in their economy, and that requires stability. They cannot have all these problems around their borders. So they wanted to work on that. So it was important. They seized the opportunity. They brought in. They got the help from China. All of that, we know the story. So, but we had said that is one thing. The implementation and the day after of the deal of the rapprochement is something else. And we're seeing that it's not that. If you want to compare it, I don't know if comparable, but it's not like when the UAE and Israel did the deal. The day after, it was like, oh my God, everyone going to the other and hugging, kissing, etc. It was euphoria. You haven't seen that thing between Saudi Arabia and Iran, you've seen some signs that yes, we will, yes. So it needs more trust building than anything else. So it is there, at least it's calming the region. At least there are no rockets going from one side to the other, etc. And this was the main, if you want, aim of that rapprochement. To Iran, I guess, like the US has other issues more important than Iran to deal with. And then at the same time, they are keeping an eye, as we said, as long as Iran is going after that nuclear power, nuclear bomb, nuclear arm, whatever, they will not keep they will not keep it on. They will keep an eye on it. But now today, it's like, it's good if Iran is able to sell its oil and gas because it could lower the prices. So that's good. Let them do that. But at the same time, once in a while, we remember that we have sanctions. So in different places that they don't have much impact on the prices, we revive this issue of sanctions. So it's just like, this is what is happening for a while now. So under the radar, but not the most important factor. And yes, we have sanctions on them. So once in a while, we play that sanction card, but we let them as well pour all the whatever they can into the market. So then we end up with these kind of prices where they're still acceptable and not see higher prices. And then we anger a bit OPEC and the Saudis. So it's that kind of a game that
yes, but the overarching theme seems to be, with the exceptions like today, that Iran is being permitted, or at least people are turning a blind eye at this current window of time to their exports. Victor, I wanted to come back to ask you a bit about the third quarter into the second half for China, and what a stronger China, stimulus and recovery, and what does it look like in numbers? I mean, the oil imports in the first half of the year, which is kind of our focus, has been very high. It's sort of hard to see them getting higher in the second half. Even if the economy does better, oil prices will be higher. And China is, it seems to me, unlikely to import more oil. They might consume more oil from their storage and so on, but import more oil in the second half? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the country is expected to consume more oil in the second half indeed, but imports have been quite high already. Say in June, well, it might be close to the record high, say second to the record high in June maybe. And
what is that?
We are talking about 14.6 million barrels per day, something like that.
Wow.
And
wow. That's
because,
imports only.
Yes, imports only. And crude ones also grew in June because maintenance job. We had our Chinese refineries maintenance peak in May, and then we've dropped to about 1.06 million barrels per day in July. But imports would be, can remain at about the same level as present. And we are not expecting a larger growth in the second half of the year, though we expect consumption to peak in, say, September, October, just like the past few years.
At what number would you expect consumption to peak at?
Well, it could be around 15 million barrels per day. Yeah, the throughput, yes, would be quite close to the level 2. We can expect it to grow by about 2% from now. And we do not have much refinery maintenance in the second half of the year, say particularly in the last quarter. And the recovery and the country's economic recovery will be growing fast, will be faster in the last quarter, probably in the last few months of the year.
So just to be clear, you expect that the import levels that we saw in June at about 14.6 million barrels a day will continue at that level through the second half of the year?
Well, not every month, but on the whole, no, on average, it can be close to that level. So we do not expect a larger growth on year growth, I mean, but we can expect it to be quite close, particularly if crude prices do not go much higher. But that's one precondition because the country tends to stock up more crude if crude price is not too high. Say if it's about $70. But if it drops to about $80, $90, that would be another story. Yes. And that would be quite different. Yes.
They won't be buying as much if we go above 80. Let's go to
Yes.
the survey question. And I would also like to get Neil and Laurie's outlook for the summer months as we go into our break. But the question today is sort of on the theme that we've been discussing. What will have the biggest impact on the direction of oil prices in Q3? China stimulus, we've been talking about with Victor, the OPEC cuts, which are not OPEC plus cuts. Actually, they are OPEC, they're outside of it. They're Saudi and supposedly Russia, but somewhat unlikely Russia. But nonetheless, the unilateral cuts put them in the OPEC plus tent. Further Fed rate hikes, which are expected in the coming weeks, or indeed, if your opinion is none of the above. What will have the biggest impact on the direction of oil prices in Q3? And that's our question we will be posting on social media today. Neil, I wanted to get your thoughts. Obviously, we've put a lot of things on the table this morning, but looking as we go into our off season and July, August, what you'll be watching from a distance in terms of the markets and the direction of travel.
Well, number one, will these voluntary cuts actually materialize? But for me, and it's been my sort of theory for most of this year, is the gangbuster demand growth, which a lot of people still seem to cling to for the rest of 2023, is that actually going to materialize? Will demand growth be as strong? And I've been skeptical about that for some time. Partly because earlier in the year I saw an enormous range of estimates put out by various consulting firms and the institutions. Some people with demand going up year on year by up to 2.5 million barrels a day, and others in the private consulting firms saying it'll only be 1.3, 1.4. So somewhere in the middle, we're going to come up with a number. So for me, I'm really fascinated to see how demand plays out. Demand will be impacted to some extent by interest rate rises, not just the Fed, although you're right to point that out, but the European Central Bank and the Bank of England, and indeed other countries around the world. We shouldn't forget them. And those interest rate rises, if they materialize, will in due course impact activity. It will be obviously more expensive for industry to finance their activities. Consumers are going to be hit in the pocket, so that will impact things like transport fuel sales. So, demand for me is the thing that I still believe there is a great deal of uncertainty.
Laurie, your thoughts, and particularly in the context of where does Europe go, Russia's war in Ukraine, we're not even talking about it early anymore. Your thoughts on what you'll be watching over the summer months?
Look, I think if sitting from Brussels, I'll be watching how many tourists will come to Brussels, and that will be an indicator of how much people are spending
I would think.
Yes,
there seems to be a lot of American tourists in Europe this year.
So basically, what I'm doing, like my field research, like currently unofficial, it's like I'm going every day to the Grand Place just to see like how many languages I will be hearing, to know like how many, if there are tourists. And then now suddenly I'm becoming Belgian, not liking all these tourists coming to the country because they're disturbing our calm. And this is after 6 months of being in Belgium. So I think that's one thing. And yes, as you said, I don't know like where we're going with the Russia-Ukraine war. I wouldn't pretend that I'm in the military analyst to know.
But its impact on policy making in Europe, I mean, the idea that obviously energy security going into the next winter, Europe has to get ready for that.
Yes, and now they're starting to talk about it again. At the same time, now they're starting to talk that the commission, that all this there are elections going to happen next year in Europe as well. There will be change in leadership or not. So there are things that they want to get to finish now with all the energy package. But one other thing as well is from the Eastern Mediterranean. So because yes, I'm sitting in Brussels, but I'm still I'm watching what's happening in the region. So big events coming for Lebanon actually, because we're expecting to have the second exploratory drilling in Block 9, which used to be the disputed block between Lebanon and Israel. So the first drilling will happen in that block soon. Either August or September.
By who?
By Total. So it's Total with ENI and Qatar Energy. So that's big news for Lebanon. So let's wait and see if there will be any discovery. And if there is a discovery, that will be the first discovery for the country, and then it will be another story, and we'll write a different story for the country. Not to say a bright story, but at least something new and big that will happen for the country if there is a discovery. So I'll be watching that as well.
Well, hopefully
Sean?
you'll be watching it. Yes.
Sean? Yes.
Victor?
When I talk about the
Last
numbers,
word, yeah.
Yes. When I talk about the numbers, we're talking about consumption, say over 14 million barrels. And if we're looking at imports in June, it would be about slightly above 12 million barrels. 12 million barrels. Yes.
Of slightly above 12 million barrels.
12 million. Imports,
okay.
imports.
So that's a good, thank you for that clarification. So imports in June were a little above 12 and consumption was 14.6.
Over 14, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And your prediction is that 12 will be consistent on average through the second half of the year.
Yes.
And consumption will be similar at around 14.6 to 15 level. One last point, Victor, I wanted to get your insight on. We've seen that the Chinese refiners have been exporting a lot of products into Asia during the first half of the year. What's your outlook for that in the second half?
Well, exports grew quite fast in the first quarter and then declined in the second quarter. But we are expecting a pickup again in the third quarter because domestic diesel demand is still quite, seasonally weak now. And they will not cut exports quite dramatically before September and October. If December, demand grows so fast as expected in September, October, they would cut exports by then, yes.
Okay, well, we'll wrap it up there again with Brent crude oil trading this morning out of Asia at $78 a barrel. We thank you, Victor Yang, as always, for your contributions. Have a great summer. I know it's not quite summer, but obviously China has a hot period at this time. Laurie Hatayan, I hope you have a wonderful summer and get to spend some of it in the Summerland and not in Brussels. And Neil Atkinson, as always, thank you so much for your insights. Have a great summer, and we look forward to having you guys all back in September. All the best. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good.